If you play both jazz and classical styles on your saxophone, should you be using two different embouchures? A lot of saxophonists play in the jazz and classical style on their instrument, and I get asked a lot whether or not there's two different embouchures you should be using, one for jazz and one for classical. So there's basically two things we have to talk about when we're figuring out the differences between the two. One is the lower lip position and how rolled in or out the lower lip should be on the reed. And the other is how much are we engaging the muscles in our embouchure versus using our jaw and our lower teeth for support. Now, before we get into that, we do need to point out that to play in a classical style, you are not going to be using what would be considered a jazz mouthpiece generally. A classical mouthpiece is going to have a much smaller tip opening, and you're going to use a stiffer reed. Therefore, you're going to have some differences in the way that your embouchure sets up on the instrument to get its best sound. On a jazz mouthpiece, the reed strength will go down a tiny bit, but often the opening of the mouthpiece gets much, much larger. And so you'll use a weaker reed, which will cause you to make differences in the way you set up on that mouthpiece to get its best sound. So let's talk about lip position first. And again, what we're talking about is how rolled in or rolled out the lower lip will be when touching the reed. And to do that, we need to be able to identify the red part of your lower lip. And this is called the vermilion. And the vermilion border on the outside is here where it changes from pink or red to your flesh color. And the vermilion border on the inside would be where the lower lip changes from red to wet. That's where the wet part starts. We never want to be rolled in so far that we're touching the flesh part of our skin, and we never want to be rolled out so far that we're touching the wet part. We always want to be in contact with the red vermilion part of our lip on the reed. So where should the lower lip position be if you're playing on a jazz mouthpiece in a jazz style? I'm going to use my hand here as an illustration of the red vermilion on the bottom part of my lip here. And we could say where my fingertips are is where the wet and the vermilion touch. That's the vermilion border on the inside. And we say my knuckles over here would be where the border is between the red and the flesh color. And so when you're playing jazz, we want to roll out ever so slightly so that more of the inside of the vermilion is in contact with the reed. And I like to use the idea of a clock here. If I can identify 12 o'clock or the center of my vermilion and I roll that out, I might be only going to about 1 o'clock. So I'd be rolling out so that I feel like 1 o'clock is up. If I roll to 2 o'clock, I'd be getting very close to where I'd be touching the wet part of my lip. And that is generally way too far because we lose control of the muscles. And you may not be able to support the sound enough to get the pitch up and to play open and resonant with a nice steady tone. So I like to think of, for jazz, I roll out to 1 o'clock. Okay, so let me demonstrate. I have my jazz mouthpiece on. I'm going to identify where I think 12 o'clock or right in the middle of the lower vermilion is, and I'm going to place that up on the reed, and then I'll play. And then using the same amount of air, I'm going to roll out a little bit to where I feel like I'm at 1 o'clock. So I feel like I can play a little more open this way because I'm using less of my teeth to support that sound when I roll out. If I roll out even more, at 2 o'clock, I still feel like I'm getting an open sound there, but I also feel like I'm having to work too hard to keep the sound steady. By rolling out that far, I'm losing the ability to maintain the consistency of the pressure with my muscles. Now, if I roll in, now I can start engaging my jaw and my teeth to help support that. So I'm rolling in from 12 to 11, just rolling in a little bit. So I feel like the sound is getting a little harsh and brittle. And if I roll in even farther, I'm losing support again because I'm having to use my teeth almost exclusively to support the sound. So you can think about it, the more you roll in, the more you have to use your jaw and your teeth to support. The more you roll out, the more you have to use the muscles in your lips to support. Now, one of the reasons on my jazz mouthpiece it gets harder to support it as I go in is because the tip opening is much bigger and I'm having to use much more of my teeth to support that sound when I've rolled in to keep it consistent, but it's very, very difficult because of how open the mouthpiece is. Okay, so now I've switched to my classical mouthpiece, and we're going to repeat that same experiment. Now the classical mouthpiece has a smaller tip opening, so the tip is closer to the reed, and then to counterbalance that, I've put on a much stiffer reed. So I've gone about as stiff as I can to where I feel like I'm not fighting the instrument, but I'm able to play easily with a good sound. And then I'll identify on my lip where the center of the lower vermilion is, and I'm going to play there right up at 12 o'clock. And now I'll roll in just a little bit, so I'm at 11 o'clock. Now because that reed is stiffer and the tip opening is smaller, I feel like I need more support from my teeth and my jaw to be able to support that sound. And I feel like rolling into 11 o'clock gave me a really nice stereotypical classical sound. I was able to get a nice vibrato there, and I'm not using as much of the muscles around the face to support that sound. Now if I roll in even farther, so we'll say into 10 o'clock, now I feel like I'm getting the sound pinched off just a little bit, and it's very difficult to stay open because I'm putting too much pressure now to be able to get a steady sound with my teeth and my jaw. So we're basically just choking off the instrument. So now what happens if I roll out? Okay, so here's 12 o'clock again. And I'll roll out to 1. Getting a little harder to control the pitch and the steadiness of tone because now I'm relying just on the muscles of the face. And I'll roll out even more. It's very difficult to play when I'm rolled out too far. So definitely the best sound I'm getting on my classical mouthpiece is when I'm rolled in just a little bit. So this is literally the opposite of what we do on the jazz mouthpiece, and this is simply by virtue of the fact that I'm using a stiffer reed with a smaller tip opening, and on the jazz mouthpiece I'm using a larger tip opening with a weaker reed. This is one reason why often you'll see classical players, they'll put cigarette paper or something over their bottom teeth because they're using more of the teeth to support the sound, and that can start pushing into the lower lip. Sometimes it'll start to tear up the skin in there just a little bit if you do it a lot. So they put paper over the lip that kind of buffers that and makes it more comfortable. But when you're playing jazz, while the bottom teeth do touch the lower lip and support just a little bit, it's very, very easy on the lip. You're not putting much pressure at all, so you shouldn't ever be tearing up the inside of your lower lip when you're playing jazz if you have your lip in the right position. Now you can do a little experimenting to see how far you can go. Maybe you want to try to roll out just a little more. Maybe you want to try to roll in just a little bit more and see what that does for you. This is all a little bit subjective because what I feel is 1 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock might be a little bit different for you. But ultimately, we're trying to roll out a little bit for jazz, in a little bit for classical. Otherwise, the embouchure stays relatively the same. And we're just looking for a full sound that is easy to support given the equipment challenges that we have when we're moving back and forth between those styles. Hope that helps.